He built empires in Manhattan, but couldn't build a relationship with his own son. Richard Bennett was too late the night Ethan was left bleeding in a Bronx alley. And the only reason his son is alive is an 11-year-old girl in a wheelchair named Anna, who stayed, who cared, when no one else did. She didn't ask for thanks. She just didn't want him to die alone. But when Richard tries to help her in return, he finds a broken system, an absent family, and a city that forgets kids like Anna. What begins as an impulsive gesture turns into a battle for dignity, belonging, and the kind of love that isn't bought, it's earned. Stay with us to see how one act of kindness sparks a fight for justice and how two broken families might just become one. The rain wasn't just falling, it was slashing down in sheets, aggressive and fast, drowning out sirens that should have been heard from miles away. On a cracked sidewalk in the Bronx, Ethan Bennett lay crumpled, his face turned to the side, a dark line of blood seeping from his temple and mixing with the filth at the edge of the curb. His hands were scraped and twitching. His backpack lay splayed open beside him, its contents soaked and useless. Crushed papers, a broken pencil, a phone with a cracked screen that had stopped working long before someone tried to dial for help. But no one had tried. Not until she came. Anna Carter, small and soaked to the bone, rolled up in her wheelchair and didn't hesitate. She reached down, ignoring the ache in her back and shoulders as she leaned forward to press her hand into his. Her fingers were cold, but not as cold as his. "You're not dead," she whispered. Not like a prayer, but like a decision. She held his hand tightly as if that alone could anchor him to the world. And still, no sirens. She looked around. No one else had stopped. 5 minutes had passed, or 10, or 20. Time didn't work properly when you were 11 and sitting alone in a wheelchair next to a bleeding stranger. Ethan had started to groan, barely. That gave her something to hold on to. She had her phone, prepaid, barely charged, held together by a pink rubber band, and she had used it for only one thing, dialing 911. She'd given clear instructions, corner of 149th and Grand Concourse, near the bus stop with the broken bench. "A kid's hurt. No, I don't know him. No, I don't think he can answer questions. Just come, please." Then she hung up, placed the phone back under her coat, and sat next to Ethan. She didn't touch her wheels. She didn't shift her body. Any movement risked making him feel more alone. "They're coming," she murmured. "You're not gonna die here." So unsure why she was saying it, but it helped. Not him, he couldn't hear her. It helped her. She'd seen people like him before. Boys bleeding out on sidewalks. No one ever stayed. She wasn't going to be one of them. The sirens finally came, faint at first, then louder. Anna felt them before she heard them. They vibrated in her spine, in the metal of her chair. People started to gather. Not many, just a few faces under umbrellas. Some curious, some cautious. None of them had stopped when it mattered. Now that flashing lights were present, they were suddenly interested. The paramedics rushed out, their voices fast and clipped, full of purpose. One reached for Ethan, another glanced at Anna. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I called. That was all. You stayed with him?" She nodded again. "What's your name, sweetheart?" She didn't answer that. She looked at Ethan. "You'd better wake up," she whispered under her breath, too low for anyone to hear. The moment they started loading him onto the stretcher, she let go of his hand. Her own felt strangely empty. She turned her chair slightly away, not because she wanted to leave, but because she didn't want anyone to see the way her jaw was trembling. She hadn't cried, not once, but her face felt hot and tired. A black car pulled up before the ambulance even drove off. Not a cab, not a police vehicle. A sleek, high-end town car that didn't belong on this street. Out stepped a man in a long, dark coat, umbrella already open before his shoes touched the ground. His pace was too fast to be casual, too direct to be aimless. This wasn't a man who wandered. Richard Bennett. You didn't have to know his face to recognize what kind of man he was, the kind who made decisions in elevator rides, who signed papers that ruined people who hadn't taken the subway in 20 years. The paramedics didn't stop to greet him. They didn't need to. He moved like someone who assumed the world would shift for him, and usually it did. When he saw the blood on Ethan's face, his breath caught. For a second, then his voice kicked in. "What hospital?" he asked the lead MT. "Did he wake up? Did anyone see anything?" His questions came like machine gun fire. He didn't notice Anna, not yet. It took a full 30 seconds before Richard finally looked down and saw her, the girl in the wheelchair, soaked to the skin, her hands red from cold or something else. "Were you here?" he asked, uncertain. Anna didn't nod, didn't speak, just stared up at him. He repeated the question a little slower. Were you with my son?" Her eyes didn't leave his. She looked tired. Not like someone who wanted to sleep, but like someone who had stopped waiting for people to understand. Finally, she spoke. "He didn't need a ride," she said. He needed someone to stay. The words landed heavier than he expected. Richard blinked. The umbrella shifted slightly in his hand. "I owe you," he began, instinctively reaching for the wallet in his coat. She shook her head. "No," she said, firm. "I don't want anything." Her voice wavered just once, then held. "I just didn't want him to be alone." She gave one last look toward the ambulance and then turned her chair without waiting for a response. He stood there, dumbfounded. Richard Bennett, a man who had spoken in courtrooms, boardrooms, and to world leaders, found himself utterly wordless before a girl who barely reached his elbow sitting down. His hand still hovered where his wallet had been. It felt ridiculous now. He watched her roll away slowly, steadily, maneuvering past puddles and uneven pavement like she'd done it 1,000 times. No dramatic exit, no music, just a girl disappearing into the city as if she'd been born part of it. The sirens began again, this time driving away with his son inside. He remained standing for several more seconds, the umbrella shaking slightly from the wind. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she came from. All he had was a single sentence echoing in his mind, said without pity or performance by a stranger who didn't expect to be thanked. "I just didn't want him to be alone, and for reasons he couldn't name." Richard Bennett felt more alone in that moment than he had in years. It had taken Richard 2 full days to find her again. 2 days of phone calls, dead ends, and waiting for someone to get back to him. He wasn't used to waiting. His world was built on instant callbacks and direct lines. But when it came to a girl without an address, a last name in any system, or a legal guardian currently reachable, no amount of power moved things faster. Anna Carter was a name scribbled in pencil on a public school enrollment form, connected to a grandmother named Loretta Carter, currently in intensive care after a series of strokes. There was no listed father. The mother's name was crossed out, and every address Richard chased turned up either abandoned or untraceable. Eventually, a woman at the hospital cafeteria remembered seeing a girl in a wheelchair coming to visit. Quiet and always alone, never during visiting hours. That was the lead that worked. Richard found Anna sitting in a folding chair next to a vending machine on the lower level of the hospital. Her wheelchair parked beside her, charging from a portable power bank wrapped in duct tape. She didn't seem surprised to see him. She just looked up and said, "I didn't think you'd come." Richard didn't answer right away. He crouched in front of her, not out of pity, but to meet her eye to eye. "Are you all right?" he asked. Anna tilted her head slightly. "I'm not the one who got beat up," she replied. Her voice had that same even calmness he remembered from the night in the rain, not blank, but careful, measured. "Where are you staying?" he asked. She shrugged. "Here, or the waiting room upstairs. Depends who's on shift." That answer hit him harder than he expected. She said it like it was ordinary. "Is there anyone with you?" he pressed. "No," she said simply. "They said CPS was coming to find a place, a shelter or something, but those take a while and most don't do chairs." Her words carried no drama, just facts. And yet the weight of what she said landed with the same impact as a punch to the chest. Richard turned to look at her chair, the wheels slightly rusted, the cushions worn. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked. Anna looked past him. "Since Nana got sick? 2 weeks? 3? Then are you here because of him, your son?" He could have said no. He wanted to. He wanted to pretend it was more noble than guilt, but it wasn't. "Yes," he said. "But not only because of him." She didn't respond. He reached for his phone and dialed a number. "I'm getting you a place. A proper place. With a bed. And support. Not some hallway with broken chairs." Her voice came fast. "If it's a shelter, I won't go." He paused. "It's not." She narrowed her eyes. "They said there's a spot in a building in Queens, 2 flights of stairs. But the lady there said she'd help lift me if I needed." "That's what the system thinks is accessible." Richard blinked, processing her words. A million thoughts crossed his mind. Legal risks, liability, optics, all the things his staff would scream about, but none of it mattered in that moment. "What would you say if I offered something else?" he asked. "Not forever. Just until we figure this out. Somewhere you don't have to charge your chair next to a Coke machine." Anna stared at him for several seconds. "What kind of something else?" she asked. "My place," he said. "Just for now." That was when her face changed, not in fear, but in disbelief. They walked out of the hospital together. Rather, she rolled and he walked beside her, carrying the small backpack she had slung over her chair, stuffed with what looked like school books and a change of clothes. The staff didn't stop them. No one asked for paperwork. Maybe they assumed Richard was family, or maybe they were just relieved someone was stepping in. In the car, Anna barely spoke. She kept her hands folded tightly in her lap. At one point, he offered her a snack bar from the glove compartment. She shook her head. "I already ate," she said. From the vending machine, he didn't push. It wasn't hunger she was guarding, it was space. At a red light, he glanced over. "Do you have everything you need?" She nodded, then added, "I left my charger, but I'll be okay for now." A silence settled again. Not uncomfortable, just fragile. Halfway to the Upper East Side, she finally asked a question. "What kind of apartment do you live in?" He wasn't sure what she meant. "It's just a regular place," he said. "Not like a palace or anything." She gave a small nod. Then, after a pause, the question that stayed with him long after she asked it, "Does it have an elevator?" Richard's reply was automatic. Yes, of course. But the weight of her question didn't leave the car. She hadn't asked if it had a doorman or how many bedrooms or if she would have her own space. She asked the only thing that would decide whether she'd be able to go up to the front door at all. In her world, everything started with access. He felt stupid for not thinking of that before. The elevator, the doorway widths, the bathroom handles, none of it had crossed his mind until her question brought it crashing into relevance. He cleared his throat in a wide entryway. No stairs. He said it not to impress her, but because he suddenly needed her to believe it. She looked out the window and gave a slight nod. Okay. That was all. No gratitude, no smile, just acceptance. Not because she trusted him, but because, for now, she had no better option. And that realization stuck to him like something he couldn't wash off. Not pity, not shame, just a quiet, growing sense of responsibility. One that didn't come with a contract or escape clause. When they arrived, the building staff opened the door like they always did, greeting Richard with formal nods and not subtle curiosity. A girl in a wheelchair was not his usual kind of guest. Anna didn't flinch under their gaze. She rolled forward at her own pace, not looking up at the ceilings or commenting on the decor. The elevator ride was silent. He noticed her eyes following the numbers as they climbed. 4. 8. 11. No panic. No awe. When the doors opened to his penthouse floor, she simply said, "Which way?" and followed him. The apartment itself was minimalist, elegant, and cold. Glass, steel, clean lines, the kind of space meant to impress, not comfort. "Your room's down this hallway," he said, pointing. She rolled toward it slowly. When she reached the door, she stopped. "Can I ask something?" Churned. "Of course." She looked at the threshold, then back at him. "If I need help with the bathroom, I'll figure it out. Just don't put me somewhere I can't get out of without you." Her voice was low, but it carried weight. "I don't like being stuck." Richard nodded quietly. "You won't be." The decision had been made, and Richard did what he always did when decisions were made. He hired people. Contractors, designers, accessibility consultants. They descended on his penthouse like a tactical unit. Measurements were taken, walls assessed, doors evaluated for minimum widths. Within 48 hours, a crew began modifying what had once been an elegantly appointed guest room into something entirely different. Not a luxury suite, but a space someone like Anna could actually live in. Door frames were widened to accommodate her wheelchair without bumping her knuckles. Grab bars were drilled into walls. The bathroom was gutted and rebuilt, toilet repositioned, shower replaced with a roll-in model, anti-slip flooring laid down with brutal efficiency. It was all done with precision, speed, and cost-no-object attitude. But what no one could retrofit was the invisible silence that lingered between Anna and Richard as it all unfolded. She watched the construction from the hallway, her arms folded, expression unreadable. She didn't say thank you, didn't comment on the progress. She simply observed. Not with wonder or suspicion, but the quiet caution of someone who'd learned long ago that nice things didn't stay, and grand gestures didn't mean security. Meanwhile, Ethan recovered slowly in his room down the hall. Bandages removed one by one, bruises fading at a glacial pace. What didn't fade was the discomfort he felt watching his father act like a man he didn't recognize. Richard was home. Not just physically, though, that alone was shocking, but involved. Walking through hallways, answering calls from inside the apartment instead of 36 floors below, actually speaking to people who weren't on payroll. Ethan caught glimpses of him standing in the kitchen late at night, staring into nothing, holding a glass of water like he'd forgotten how to drink it. He overheard conversations between his father and someone named Marisol about temporary placement and ACX supervision and guardianship pathways. At first, Ethan thought it was about him, but then he heard the word Anna. That's when everything started to click. He realized the girl from the night of the attack, the one in the wheelchair, hadn't just disappeared after calling 911. She was still here, somewhere in the apartment, and his father had made a place for her, a real place. Ethan didn't know how to feel about that. He wasn't angry, but he wasn't exactly calm either. Anna, for her part, didn't ask questions, She stayed out of the way of the workers, kept her backpack close, and navigated her new environment with mechanical precision. She wasn't rude, but she didn't engage. Every offer Richard made, new clothes, upgraded chair, private nurse, was met with a flat no thank you. She refused help with dressing, refused to use the intercom, refused to call him anything at all. She addressed Ethan once, a quiet hi in the hallway, and he returned it with a nod and nothing more. It was like watching two people who had shared a war zone, each unsure if the other had made it out alive. One afternoon, while the construction crew finished assembling the new shower bench, Anna sat in the living room with a notebook on her lap, drawing something no one could see. Richard passed by, paused, and asked, "Are you okay with everything they're doing?" She shrugged. "I don't live here," she said, not to be cruel, but to be accurate. "It's just a room." He nodded slowly and said nothing more. That night, the contractor emailed Richard to confirm the door had been widened. The room was finished, but the girl wasn't moved in yet. The next morning, the movers brought in the final piece, a low bed with transfer rails, already made up with new linen. Richard had selected the set himself, not through an assistant, but standing in a store looking at colors. Imagining what would feel least like a hospital, he chose pale yellow. It reminded him of light, the kind that doesn't hurt your eyes. When everything was done, he wheeled the chair from the living room to the doorway and called Anna over. "It's ready," he said simply. She followed without a word, rolled through the newly widened doorway, and stopped at the edge of the rug. She looked around the room, scanned the bars, the dresser with low handles, the shelf with a single book already placed on it, a wrinkle in time. He'd remembered her saying once during a short ride in the car that she liked stories with girls who traveled. After a few seconds, she rolled to the window, looked out, and asked, "Do I close this curtain myself?" "If you want to," he replied. "It's yours now." That was when she said it, the first crack in her armor. "It doesn't feel like mine, but it doesn't feel like someone else's either." It wasn't a compliment, but it wasn't rejection. That night after dinner, a silent one as most had been, Ethan wandered down the hall. He passed the new room without stopping, hesitated, then reversed course. Something in the air felt different. He knocked softly on the open door frame. No answer. He stepped in. Anna wasn't in her chair. She was already in bed, reading. The overhead light was off, and a small reading lamp glowed near her elbow. She looked up. "Hey," he said awkwardly. "You okay in here?" She nodded, but then tilted her head toward the windowsill. "You don't like flowers?" she asked. Ethan looked confused until he noticed the small glass vase on the sill. Inside it were 3 sunflowers, a little wilted, probably from the corner store. "They weren't there this morning," he said. "Nope," she replied. "I asked someone to get them for me." "My dad?" Ethan asked. She nodded. He didn't ask why, just brought them. Ethan walked over, stared at the flowers, then at her. "Why'd you want them?" She didn't smile, but her voice softened. "Because sunflowers follow light, even when it's hard to find. Sometimes I think people do that too." He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded and left. And in that small exchange, nothing profound was said. No walls came crashing down. But something shifted. Not loudly, not obviously, but undeniably. The room felt fuller somehow, not because of the furniture, but because of what had been placed in it without words. Effort, thought, maybe even the beginning of trust. Richard didn't know about the sunflowers until later. He walked past the room that night, paused, and saw the light still on under the door. He didn't knock, didn't intrude. But something about knowing she had placed something there, something alive, something chosen, changed how he saw the room. It wasn't just a guest room anymore. It wasn't just wide enough for her chair. It had been claimed, subtly, quietly. He didn't tell her he noticed. He wouldn't. But he left his office door slightly ajar that night, something he never did, and turned his phone to silent, just in case. Because sometimes the first sign that someone is starting to stay isn't a declaration, it's a flower on a windowsill, placed by a girl who hasn't said yet that she feels safe. Marisol Vega arrived exactly at 9 a.m., clipboard in hand, credentials visible but not flaunted. She was younger than Richard expected, with sharp eyes and a calm, even voice that made it clear she wasn't here to be impressed. The visit wasn't adversarial, it was procedural, but Richard couldn't help feeling judged, and not by the checklist she carried. Marisol moved through the apartment like she had done this 1,000 times, checking door widths, asking about emergency access, evaluating not just the presence of modifications, but the intention behind them. When they reached Anna's room, she paused. The bed was made. A pair of folded leggings and a book sat on the nightstand. She picked the bedding herself, Richard offered, unsure why he was explaining. Marisol gave a small nod. "That's good." Choice matters. She scribbled something down. So then as they walked toward the kitchen, she stopped. Listen, she said, Anna doesn't need a state-of-the-art shower. She doesn't care about marble counters or skyline views. What she needs is consistency. People who don't leave. People who look her in the eye and ask how her day was. She doesn't need luxury. She needs presence. Richard froze slightly at that. It was less a comment and more a verdict. Later that day, Richard sat at his desk, the silence of the apartment pressing down harder than usual. He couldn't get Marisol's words out of his head. Presence. He'd built companies from the ground up, survived hostile takeovers, negotiated billion-dollar mergers, all without breaking a sweat. But this was different. There were no spreadsheets to tell him how to father a stranger, no contract that could bind trust. He looked at a photo of Ethan on the wall taken 2 years ago. They were at a gala, black tie, perfect lighting. Ethan had smiled for the camera. But Richard remembered the moment. The boy's hands clenched at his sides, the unspoken resentment in his posture. That was the night Ethan asked if he could skip the after-party and go home alone. Richard let him. He didn't even ask why. Now Anna, a girl who barely spoke to him, had drawn more emotional honesty out of him in 2 weeks than his own son had in 13 years. And she hadn't even tried. That night he canceled 3 meetings and opened his laptop to read everything he could about kinship, guardianship, special education laws, and the intricacies of family court hearings. It felt like cramming for a test he should have studied for years ago. The court date arrived fast. Richard entered the courthouse wearing a tailored suit, but it did nothing to steady his nerves. The family court was nothing like the polished courtrooms he was used to. There were no glossy conference tables, no executive summaries, no power ties to signal status. Just peeling linoleum floors, rows of tired chairs, and too many stories packed into too small a space. He sat alone at first, his lawyer delayed. Around him, families whispered anxiously. Some children clung to adults. Others sat silently, blank-faced and already accustomed to waiting rooms. Richard tried not to stare, but he couldn't help noticing the emptiness of it all. The way some parents looked at their phones instead of their children. The way some kids looked like they were holding their breath. A woman across from him rocked a stroller with one foot while filling out forms. Another young man paced near the hallway, muttering about case numbers. Everyone there was waiting for someone else to make a decision that would alter their lives. It was unsettling. For once, Richard had no power in the room. And the silence of it, the absolute helplessness of being just another name on a docket, was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. When Anna arrived with Marisol, she didn't say much. She wore a clean hoodie and jeans, hair pulled back in a low bun. Her chair moved quietly beside the social worker. No fuss, no introduction. She didn't even look at Richard at first. She wheeled herself to a bench in the corner, away from the noise, and pulled a small pad of Post-its from her pocket. Richard watched her from across the room, something in his chest tightening. She scribbled on the pad with a ballpoint pen, quick and rhythmic. He couldn't see what she was writing until Marisol stood to speak with the clerk and left Anna momentarily alone. That's when he got up and crossed the room, not even sure what he was going to say. But when he reached her side, he paused. Her fingers were still moving, and on the top Post-it, in small, careful handwriting, were the words, Anna Carter Bennett. She'd written it 3 times. Not big, not for show. Just enough to test how it looked. Richard didn't say anything. His throat tightened. She looked up, not startled, not defensive, just curious. I was just practicing, she said, almost apologetically. It's not real or anything. Richard swallowed. It doesn't have to be. Not yet. That single moment hit him harder than anything Marisol had said, anything the judge would decide. She had been imagining a version of belonging. Quietly. Without permission. Not demanding it, just experimenting with the idea. It wasn't about money or guardianship or signatures. It was about being wanted, not legally, but emotionally. And suddenly Richard realized something that should have been obvious long ago. He wanted to be her father. Not because it looked good, not because it solved something, not because she had saved his son, but because something in her presence had filled an absence he hadn't even named. She didn't need him to say it right now, and he wouldn't. But he sat beside her, careful not to crowd. She didn't move away, that was enough. They sat there, 2 names on a docket, 2 people the world didn't expect to meet, much less connect. Richard stared at the name she had written again and again, Anna Carter Bennett. He didn't know if a judge would ever approve it. But for the first time, he knew that he wanted to earn it. Richard first heard the name through a voicemail left by a reporter, a tabloid journalist, sharp-voiced and overeager, asked if he had any comment on the accusations being made by Reggie Morales, the legal father figure of Anna Carter. Richard didn't answer the call, didn't need to. The name alone was enough to send a sick weight into his stomach. Later that afternoon, Marisol confirmed it officially. Reggie Morales had reappeared after years of silence, claiming not just familiarity with Anna but guardianship. He was never legally assigned anything, she explained. No papers, no court filings. He just lived with Anna's mother for a time. But that's enough to muddy the waters. The worst part wasn't even the claim, it was how Reggie weaponized the media. In a viral video posted that night, he looked into the camera and said, "All I see is some billionaire trying to use a little disabled girl for his own redemption story." His tone was slick, performative. The damage was immediate. Twitter threads erupted. Op-eds followed. Photos of Richard escorting Anna to school surfaced with cruel headlines like "From Shark to Savior." Anna saw it. Ethan saw it. And Richard, for the first time, felt truly powerless. Anna didn't speak about it, not when the video went viral, not when the news trucks parked outside the building, not when she started being whispered about in the school hallways. The silence wasn't stubborn, it was protective. Something had closed in her. She no longer looked Richard in the eye, no longer lingered in common spaces. The only sound that came from her room was the quiet hum of her wheelchair charging. Richard tried asking gently, "Do you want to talk about what he said?" She shook her head. "Do you want me to respond to it?" Another shake. Even Ethan noticed it. He sat with her one morning before school, both of them staring into the untouched breakfast on their plates. "He doesn't know you," he said softly. "He doesn't get to talk like that." Anna didn't respond, just kept her eyes down. What was unsaid was heavier than anything they could offer. What she feared wasn't that people would believe Reggie, it was that he might come, that he might show up and take the little safety she had found, fold it all into the same chaos he used to bring. She remembered him vividly, even though she tried not to. The school became a battleground she didn't expect. At first it was just glances, then whispers. Then one of her teachers casually mentioned, "We're here for you, Anna, we support you. No matter what the papers say." That sentence, intended as comfort, felt like a crack in the foundation. People were watching her now, not just as the girl in the wheelchair, but the girl in the headlines. And the physical barriers followed. On a gray Tuesday morning, she arrived at the usual subway station with Ethan, only to find the elevator out of service. Again. A handwritten sign taped over the button said, "Temporarily unavailable, use alternate access point." The alternate access point was 5 blocks away and uphill. Ethan looked at her. "Want to go back and take a car?" he offered. She shook her head, her jaw set. But then, without another word, she rolled herself to the nearest bit of concrete and parked next to the stairs. Her hands dropped to her lap. She didn't cry, didn't curse, just sat there, quiet and still, as people passed her like she wasn't there. Ethan didn't push her, didn't try to fix it. He just stood nearby, waiting, unsure what to say or if he should say anything at all. Minutes passed. People came and went. Students rushed down into the subway. A man with a coffee nearly tripped on her front wheel and muttered something about blocking the walkway, but she didn't move. Ethan sat down next to her on the curb, watching the sky more than anything else. They didn't talk, they didn't need to. Silence had become the new language between them, and it was fluent. Then, without a word, he got up, walked around the back of her chair and grabbed the handles. "You don't have to," she murmured. "I know," he replied. But I want to." She still didn't look at him, but he felt her body shift slightly. It wasn't permission, not quite, but it wasn't resistance either. He began pushing, slowly, taking care with every crack in the pavement. They didn't speak during the entire climb up the block. But with every step he took, she let herself lean a little more into the backrest. Something unspoken passed between them, not healing, but alignment. She was letting him carry part of it, and he wasn't asking for anything in return. That made all the difference. At the top of the block, they reached a quieter entrance to the station with a working elevator. As they approached, Anna finally turned her head slightly, just enough to make eye contact. "Thank you," she said, barely above a whisper. Ethan didn't smile. He just nodded once and let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Anytime," he said, and he meant it. She didn't say anything else, but as he leaned slightly to press the elevator button, she did something she hadn't done before. She reached back with one hand and gripped the arm of the chair. Not for balance, not for necessity, but for connection. She held onto his wrist firmly. It lasted just a few seconds, but it was a gesture loaded with trust. Ethan didn't move, didn't speak, just let her hold on. When the elevator dinged and the doors opened, she let go, rolled forward, and didn't look back. But that touch, that small, deliberate choice to hold on, was louder than any thank you. And Ethan, standing in the doorway of that elevator, understood exactly what it meant. She wasn't alone in this anymore. He wasn't just helping, he was being let in. Loretta Carter's hospital discharge was quiet, like most things about her. No family crowding the lobby, no balloons or flowers. Just a nurse pushing her wheelchair to the curb while she waited for the transportation service that Richard had arranged. She'd asked to speak to him privately, not over the phone, not through social workers or attorneys, in person. When Richard arrived at the hospital, she was already waiting in a chair just outside the main entrance, dressed in a long brown coat and holding her purse tightly in her lap. "Mr. Bennett," she said when he approached, with the calm dignity of someone who had seen life from both its knees and its peaks. "You made time. That tells me something." Richard sat next to her on the bench and nodded. "I owed you that much." She gave a tired laugh. "You don't owe me anything. But you're in Anna's life now, and I need to understand what that means for her and for you." There was no confrontation in her voice, only gravity. This wasn't a woman trying to regain control. It was a woman trying to let go, but carefully, like someone placing a fragile object into new hands. They sat together for a long while, skipping small talk. Loretta's questions came with sharp precision, but never accusation. "Do you believe in God?" she asked suddenly. Richard blinked. "Not sure," he replied. "I believe in showing up and making things right when you can." She considered it. "That's a start," she said, "because raising a child isn't just about what you give them. It's about who you become in front of them." Richard nodded, unsure what else to say. She pressed on. "Anna's smart. Smarter than most adults I know. But she watches people like a hawk. She reads your silences faster than your words. If she's opening a door to you, and I believe she is, don't step halfway in." Richard cleared his throat, more affected than he expected. "I don't want to be her savior, Miss Carter. I'm not trying to rewrite her story." Loretta gave a soft smile. "Good. So he doesn't need a new story. She needs someone who won't close the book when it gets hard." There was a silence between them then. Not awkward, just honest. "So," she said finally, "what are you doing this for? Guilt?" Richard stared ahead. "No, at least not anymore." Loretta gave a thoughtful nod. "People confuse guilt with responsibility, but guilt fades. Responsibility doesn't." She leaned slightly toward him, her voice lower. "Anna's had people promise her everything and deliver nothing. I don't care about bank accounts, apartments with elevators, or big talk. I care if you're going to stay when she pushes you away, because she will. And if you flinch even once, she'll never let you near her again." Richard's voice was quieter now. "I already know that. I think I'm ready for that risk." Loretta studied him for a long moment, then relaxed into her seat. "Then you and I are okay." He looked at her. "That's it?" She nodded. "That's it. I didn't ask to see you because I want to take her back. My health's not strong enough. But I needed to know what kind of man was stepping in, not to judge you, to prepare myself to let go." The honesty of it knocked the wind out of him. He'd prepared for a legal confrontation, a challenge to his character. He hadn't prepared for grace. Loretta patted his hand once gently. "You'll never be her mother, but you can be something she didn't think existed, someone who chose to stay." Back at the apartment, everything looked as he had left it, but something about it felt different. He walked past Anna's room, the door was closed, and headed to his office, intending to check emails, perhaps call Marisol with an update. But something stopped him. A small folded piece of paper had been taped to the outside of his door, low enough to match the height of someone in a wheelchair. He stared at it for a few seconds before peeling it off carefully, already knowing who it was from. There was no envelope, no flourish, just his name in uneven but careful handwriting. Inside, written in blue ink, were the words, "Thank you for not giving up on me when it would have been easier." That was all. No signature, no decoration, just a sentence. He stared at it, rereading it twice, then a third time. It didn't ask for anything, it didn't assume anything. It was pure acknowledgement from a girl who said little, trusted less, and rarely gave out second chances. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was bigger than that. It was quiet honesty scribbled on paper and left where only he would find it. He walked into the office, sat at his desk, and didn't touch his laptop. Instead, he opened his wallet and carefully folded the note to fit inside. It didn't fit perfectly, but that didn't matter. He placed it behind his driver's license, where he'd see it every time he opened the wallet. A reminder that what he was building here didn't come with contracts or stock options. It came with choices. The note was more than gratitude. It was proof that she noticed, not the money or the renovation or the court battle, but him, his effort. his refusal to walk away. And more than anything, it was a challenge. Keep going. Be the person this version of her believes you might be. He closed the wallet, took a breath, and stayed seated. There was no meeting to rush to. No call more important than this moment. For the first time in years, he felt like a man not just in charge of something, but responsible for someone. The note sat heavy in his pocket, not as a weight, but as an anchor, one that tethered him to something real, something fragile, and something finally beginning to grow. The media storm had started like a slow leak, a trickle of sarcastic headlines, late-night jabs, anonymous blog posts framing Richard Bennett as a calculating billionaire playing humanitarian for PR. But by the end of the week, it had become a full-on firestorm. Influencers across platforms dissected his every move, calling his guardianship of Anna a strategic empathy stunt. Photos of Anna at school, at appointments, even entering and exiting the apartment building began to circulate with captions like, "From tech tycoon to trauma hero, is Richard Bennett building a brand or a family?" More disturbingly, Anna herself became a symbol, not of resilience, but of narrative convenience. One particularly viral thread labeled her the wheelchair mascot of redemption capitalism. It was cruel, but it gained traction. Richard tried to manage it quietly, PR damage control, requests to social platforms to take down invasive photos, but none of it worked. Anna, meanwhile, stopped speaking at dinner, stopped asking questions. When Ethan asked her if she was okay, she only shrugged. Her silence wasn't passive. It was protective, and Richard, watching the girl who once challenged him with a glance now withdraw into herself, realized he was losing something much harder to repair than reputation. The breaking point came on a Thursday night when Anna didn't come out of her room for dinner, not late at all. Richard knocked once, then again. No answer. He didn't push it. Instead, he waited in the hallway back against the wall, listening to faint sounds from inside, drawers opening, the squeak of wheels moving. 10 minutes later, the door opened. She didn't look at him. She held her phone in her hand and wheeled silently past, heading toward the living room. Ethan had just finished clearing the table. When she entered, he turned, ready to ask something, but her expression silenced him. She opened the camera on her phone, set it on the coffee table, and pressed record. No tripod, no lighting, no edits. Just her sitting there, no makeup, no script, staring directly at the lens. "My name's Anna Carter," she began, her voice calm but anchored with weight. "I've seen the posts. I've read the comments. And before you decide what I am to someone else, let me tell you what I am to me." Richard stopped breathing. He didn't move. He didn't even sit. Ethan hovered near the hallway entrance. The room felt like it had stopped spinning. Anna kept speaking, her voice steady, clear, and devoid of theatrics. "I'm not a prop, I'm not a brand, I'm not a symbol. I'm a person, a kid, one who didn't ask to be part of anyone's story. I didn't get cast in a narrative. I showed up for a boy who was bleeding on the ground because I thought he deserved to have someone there. That's it. I didn't know who he was, I didn't do it for credit, and I'm not here because someone bought my silence." Her eyes flicked slightly off camera for a second toward Richard, who still hadn't moved. "He didn't save me," she continued. "He gave me a room with a door that closes. He gave me a place to charge my chair without asking for anything in return. He doesn't talk to me like I'm broken. And maybe that shouldn't be rare, but it is." The silence after that sentence was crushing. Then she leaned slightly closer to the camera, voice softening but not faltering. "So before you call me a mascot again, think about what it means to be seen as a full person, because I am one. I always have been." She paused then for the first time. A long, intentional pause. Richard's throat tightened. Ethan took a step forward but stopped himself as if any movement might fracture the moment, and his eyes didn't leave the camera. "I'm not asking for applause. I'm not asking you to like me. I'm just asking you to stop using me to make someone else look worse or better. I'm not your story to spin." Her fingers hovered over the stop button, but she didn't press it yet. Instead, she took one more breath and said the words that would travel farther than any speech Richard had ever delivered in his corporate career. "I am not a favor. I am a person." With that, she pressed stop. Then she sat back, folding her hands in her lap, the room once again swallowed by silence. She didn't look at Richard. She didn't explain what she planned to do with the video. She didn't ask for permission, because she didn't need it. And in that moment, it was painfully clear she had never needed it. The video was uploaded an hour later. Ethan helped her stabilize the footage slightly, nothing more than trimming the silence at the start and end. No effects, no text overlays. She posted it to her own profile, which had maybe 30 followers, mostly classmates. Within 2 hours, it had 1,000 views, then 10,000, then trending. Influencers who had mocked her fell strangely quiet. Comment sections flooded with apologies, with declarations of support, with disbelief that a child had delivered what entire PR firms could not: clarity. News outlets picked it up within the night. By morning, it was being played on talk shows, morning news cycles, podcasts. No one was talking about Richard anymore. They were talking about her, not as a mascot, not as a victim, not as a symbol, but as herself. Anna Carter, the girl who looked into a camera and dared to say, I am not a favor. Richard sat in the living room watching the numbers climb, his hands clasped tightly together, not in pride, in awe, in humility, in something that resembled fear, not of failure, but of not being enough for someone who had just proven herself more powerful than anyone expected. He didn't realize Ethan had entered the room until the boy sat quietly beside him. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. On the screen in front of them, Anna's voice played one last time, the sentence repeated by every article, every share, every headline. She was looking directly into the lens, but somehow it felt like she was speaking directly to them, to Richard, to Ethan, to every person who had ever stood on the edge of someone else's pain and not known whether to step forward or back. Everybody deserves someone who stays, she said, voice unwavering. Not out of obligation, but because they chose to. The video ended. Richard didn't move. Ethan didn't look at him, but the weight of her words hung between them like a contract. Unsigned, unspoken, but binding all the same. It wasn't supposed to be a dangerous day. It started like any other Tuesday. Anna went to school, Ethan walked with her, Marisol checked in with the principal, and Richard was on his way to a meeting with Anna's new IEP coordinator. Everything was operating within the rhythm they'd built, the fragile but growing routine of shared care. But the truth about trauma is that it never respects routine. And Reggie Morales, whose media circus had quieted after Anna's video went viral, had no intention of fading away quietly. He showed up at dismissal, lurking just out of sight behind the long stretch of sidewalk near the south entrance of the school. The problem wasn't just Reggie. It was the sidewalk, cracked, uneven, with no ramp at the end. The elevator down to the subway was under repair again, which meant Anna had to roll herself awkwardly across a street that forced her to descend a broken curb by tilting her chair slowly, dangerously. She did this often. The school knew it. The city hadn't fixed it. And Reggie knew it too. He waited at the base of that slope, right where her chair would be slowest, most vulnerable. That was the moment he moved. He stepped out casually at first, like someone greeting an old friend. "Hey, kid," he said, too familiar, too smooth. Anna froze halfway down the curb, her body stiffened instantly. He moved closer, a hand already reaching for the handle of her chair. "Let's take a walk. We need to talk, just us." His tone was calm, but she recognized the tight coil of control in his voice. It was the same voice he used to use with her mom when things were about to get bad. She reached quickly into her backpack, not for her phone, but for something else. Reggie noticed and tried to grab the bag. That's when a voice cut through the air. Ethan's. Let her go. He had followed her just like he always did, but this time he didn't hang back. He ran. At the same moment, Marisol Vega, who had been walking back from the parking lot, saw what was happening and shouted, "Step away from her. Now!" Reggie spun to see both of them, his hand still on his chair. "You people think you own her now," he snapped. "She's not yours." But what he didn't expect, what none of them did, was Dana Brooks, the school principal, stepping directly between him and the curb. Dana didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Let go of that chair," she said with the authority of someone who had diffused hundreds of crises. "Just never one quite like this." Reggie hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Marisol to reach for her phone and shout, "Police are on their way." That was enough. He stepped back, furious but calculating. Anna, still holding her backpack tight, stared at him. Her jaw was set, but her hands were trembling. Ethan moved beside her, placing himself physically between Reggie and the chair. Dana didn't move. Marisol held out her phone. "You can explain your version when they arrive," she said. Reggie looked between them, three people, unarmed, unafraid, and knew the moment was lost. He muttered something inaudible, turned and began walking fast down the sidewalk, but he didn't make it far. Two NYPD officers pulled up moments later, flagged down by a teacher who had seen the confrontation from a second-story classroom. They stopped him, questioned him, and Anna, her voice steady despite the shaking, gave a statement. Reggie was cuffed before the bell rang for after-school clubs. Back inside the building, they sat Anna down in the nurse's office. Not because she was physically hurt, but because she needed space. Dana stood beside her. Ethan refused to leave her side. Marisol was already coordinating with Richard. It was quiet in the room for a long time. Finally, one of the officers entered and said gently, "We have him. He won't be bothering you again." Anna didn't flinch. She just nodded once. A teacher offered her water. She declined. Marisol crouched beside her, lowering her voice. "You okay, sweetheart?" Anna didn't answer right away. Then she opened her bag and pulled something out, a laminated card, worn at the corners with Richard's name and address printed clearly on it. She had made it herself weeks ago. "They always tell you to carry your emergency contact," she said. "So I did." Marisol looked at it, surprised. "You had this with you?" Anna nodded. "In case something happened. I wanted them to know where to bring me, just in case I couldn't say it myself." She wasn't crying. She wasn't panicking. But her voice cracked just slightly on the last word. And Ethan reached out, resting a hand on the armrest of her chair without saying anything. When Richard arrived at the school, the officers were already gone and Reggie was being booked downtown. But the tension hadn't left the building. He found Anna in the nurse's office, sitting quietly while Marisol debriefed him in hushed tones. When she saw him, she didn't run to him. She didn't fall apart. She just looked at him, wide-eyed and steady, and said, "I'm okay." He nodded and knelt beside her. "You shouldn't have to be," he said. She held up the laminated card again. "I had this, just in case." He took it gently from her hands, stared at it, then handed it back. "That was smart," he whispered. She tucked it into her bag again, zipping it shut. A few minutes later, as they walked out of the building together, Richard pushing her chair while Ethan walked on the other side, a reporter called out from across the street, "Anna, why did you keep his name in your bag?" She stopped, turned her head slightly, and with a voice loud enough to carry but calm enough to cut through the noise, she answered, "Because in an emergency, everybody should know where to run." The courtroom was quiet when the ruling came down, but the words carried weight far beyond their legal phrasing. Temporary custody granted to Mr. Richard Bennett, pending continued monitoring and reevaluation. Just like that, the law had caught up with what life had already begun to decide. With Reggie Morales now behind bars awaiting trial and Loretta Carter still recovering slowly at a rehabilitation center, there was no safer or more stable place for Anna than with the Bennetts. The court order came with check-ins, supervised reviews, and more paperwork than Richard had ever signed outside a corporate deal. But none of it mattered in comparison to the way Anna looked at him when the judge spoke. She didn't smile. She never smiled when unsure, but her shoulders relaxed just enough, and that was all he needed. As they walked out of the courthouse, Ethan high-fived Anna in mock celebration, and she, uncharacteristically, didn't pull her hand away. That moment, simple and unrehearsed, said everything. Back home, what had once been a guest room was now unmistakably Anna's. Books piled up on the side table. Drawings she never let anyone see were taped behind closet doors. Her wheelchair charger sat tucked beside her bed, next to Ethan's old lava lamp she'd claimed during an argument neither of them would admit had ended in laughter. The apartment, once sterile and magazine-ready, had surrendered to life. Blankets thrown over the couch, cereal boxes left half open, socks never quite matching. But in this new messiances, a kind of rhythm emerged. Ethan and Anna argued like siblings about space in the fridge or which movie to rewatch. They rolled their eyes at Richard when he tried to make spaghetti from scratch and burned it. Anna refused to accept help for anything she could do herself. Ethan started asking her for advice on math. They still had their walls, but doors were opening, and most days they all managed to meet in the middle. Often on the living room floor, sprawled out in that sacred hour after dinner when everything felt, if not perfect, at least solid. That night was no different. They had just finished watching a documentary. Anna chose something about space exploration, which she insisted was better than fake superhero movies, and Ethan had fallen asleep on the rug, head tilted at an uncomfortable angle. Richard sat on the couch trying to finish a work email when Anna wheeled over slowly, a piece of paper in hand. "This is for you," she said almost flatly, but her eyes gave her away. It was her homework, a writing assignment that needed a parent's signature to be submitted. Richard took the paper carefully, trying not to crease it. "Did you finish it already?" he asked. She shrugged. "I had time." There was a pause. Then she spoke again, a little softer. "You can just sign parent or whatever, but if you want." Her voice trailed off, then steadied. "You can write, Dad, just this once." The world seemed to shrink to that moment. No more emails, no more hearings, no more headlines. Just her and the paper, and a question asked without pleading. Richard looked at the blank signature line. It wasn't a long word, just 3 letters. But somehow it felt like the longest journey he had ever taken to write something. He didn't move for a moment, just stared at it. "Only if I can write it like that every time from now on," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Anna's reaction was small. Her hand brushed her hair behind her ear, and she looked down like she was hiding something, but she didn't argue. She didn't tease. She didn't say, whatever. She just nodded. He signed it. The word looked almost too simple on the page. But for the first time it felt like something earned, not assumed. Not a title, but a promise. After she left the room, he folded the paper along the crease and slid it back into her homework folder, but not before staring at it once more. There it was, his name beside hers, not as a placeholder, but as part of her story now. He knew there would still be more hearings, more evaluations. Loretta might recover enough to request partial custody again. The system might change the rules next month. But none of that shifted what had already taken root here. She was part of the family. Ethan didn't even blink when she beat him at chess earlier that afternoon. Richard didn't flinch when she told him she needed new compression socks and hated asking. Everything that once felt like charity or duty was now simply ... life. Messy, inconvenient, beautiful life. That night Richard stood in the hallway outside her room. The light under the door was still on. She liked to read before bed. He didn't knock. He didn't interrupt. But he waited there for a moment longer than usual, just listening to the quiet movement inside, the turning of pages, the living proof that she was safe. He thought of the word on that paper again. Dad. Not just a sound, not just a role, a vow. And when he turned to go back to his room, he didn't take his phone, didn't open his laptop. He just walked away, breathing deeply, not with anxiety, but with the unfamiliar peace of someone who had finally arrived at the right place, not out of obligation, but by choice. The city was frozen, January's breath wrapping the sidewalks in slush and steel-gray silence. But in Anna's room, warmth defied the cold. A simple vase of sunflowers stood defiantly on the windowsill, their bright yellow heads tilted toward the frost-glazed glass, as if refusing to acknowledge the season outside. Richard had tried to replace them a week ago, thinking they'd wilted past the point of saving, but Anna stopped him with a quiet, "They're not done yet." He never brought it up again. The flowers weren't just decor, they were a line drawn in the sand, a soft protest against every winter that had come before this one. And today, of all days, they meant more than ever. Anna had a presentation at school. One she'd been working on in secret, dismissing every attempt Ethan made to peek. "You'll see it when everyone else does," she'd said, sealing her notebook with a sticker of a superhero in a wheelchair. It wasn't about decoration. It was about arrival. The assembly hall buzzed with quiet chatter as parents filed in, shoulders dusted with snow, faces red from the cold. Anna sat near the edge of the stage, a printed poster resting across her lap. She didn't fidget. She didn't look for approval. But when her name was called, she wheeled forward without hesitation. The project was titled My Home. The first slides were predictable. Sketches of ramps, images of elevators that never worked, cracked sidewalks she'd learned to avoid. The audience chuckled at her dry caption. "This ramp exists. It just doesn't help." But then her tone shifted. She talked about a different kind of architecture, not physical but emotional. "People think accessibility is just about space," she said, "but sometimes it's about being allowed to take up space, to belong." She paused before the final slide. My home didn't start with a ramp. It started the day someone decided not to leave, even when they could have, even when it would have been easier. In the crowd, Richard's hands tightened in his lap. He didn't expect to feel so much from so few words. Ethan leaned over and whispered, "She's talking about you." Richard didn't answer. He didn't need to. On stage, Anna looked directly at them, not at the teachers, not at the parents, not at the phones being held up to record her, but at her people. And then she smiled. Not the polite smile she used with strangers, not the tight-lipped smirk she wore when she was guarding herself. It was real. It cracked open something in Richard that he didn't know he was still keeping locked. The applause came late, as if the room had to collectively exhale before responding. But when it did, it was thunderous. Some people stood. Ethan clapped so hard his palms turned red. Richard simply nodded, eyes locked on the girl who had walked into his life on wheels and rewrote everything. After the event, the hallways of the school turned into rivers of coats and boots and melted snow. Richard crouched near the front steps while Ethan navigated the crowded hallway to find Anna. She appeared a few minutes later, rolling carefully through the puddles of ice water on the tile floor, her poster now slightly bent at one corner. "That was brave," Richard said. "That was mine," Anna replied, lifting her chin. He didn't argue. She wasn't looking for praise, she was claiming space. Ethan handed her the backpack she'd left behind. Without needing to say anything, he looped it onto the back of her chair, something he'd learned to do with the ease of someone who finally knew how to help without making it about himself. "Ready?" he asked. Anna didn't answer. She just nodded once, and he took that for the yes it was. Outside, the snow had thickened, but the cold no longer bit the same way. Ethan walked slightly ahead, watching for black ice. Richard wheeled Anna down the ramp carefully, not rushing, not letting the wheels slip, his hand steady on the push handle like he'd done it 100 times before, because now he had. The three of them moved like a unit, no choreography needed. They didn't speak of what came next, of lawyers or family courts or the long shadow of temporary arrangements. What they had was now. Anna tilted her head toward the snowy skyline and murmured, "The flowers are still alive." Richard smiled. "So are we." They reached the curb where their driver waited, but no one rushed. It wasn't the destination that mattered anymore. It was the walking and wheeling together. They arrived back at the apartment just before sunset. Ethan opened the door, dropped his backpack by the couch, and threw himself into the kitchen to dig for snacks. Richard pushed Anna gently through the hallway, neither of them in a hurry. As they passed the office, she stopped. "Wait." She reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out a small folded piece of paper, and taped it to the inside of the door. "Just in case we forget," she said. Richard looked at it later that night after she'd gone to bed. It read, "Home isn't a place. It's the people who stay." The handwriting was crooked. The message wasn't. And in her room, backlit by the dim city glow, the vase of sunflowers remained defiantly yellow against the January white. Heads lifted toward the cold window, reaching not for warmth, but for the belief that light always returns. If this story moved you, even in a small way, we'd love to hear what part stayed with you. Your comments mean more than you know. They remind us why we do this. Every story here takes time, care, and a deep sense of responsibility. We don't just write for clicks, we create for connection. And when you subscribe, you help us keep bringing more stories like this to life. It's a small gesture, but it makes a big difference. Take a moment to explore our other videos too. You might find something that speaks to a chapter in your own life. Thank you for watching, for feeling, and for staying with us until the end. We'll be right here, ready for the next story when you are.